We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. A space can be just another thing that we pass in and out every single day, never truly looking at the details that make it more than just the shell of a building. But it shouldn't be this way. A space should shape us. We should create our spaces intentionally, each detail, each style, each design, so that they shape the way we share our stories, the way we foster community, and ultimately, how we cultivate joy. Shaping our buildings in a way that always points towards God and His kingdom, the building will thereafter shape us. As I thought about Capstone and what I wanted, I kept thinking about, I want to be intentional. I thought it was because I love paying attention to details. Intentionality is doing something with a purpose or being deliberate. I thought it encapsulated who I was, what I loved. For example, I've always loved matching things. I've always loved matching my socks with my shirt at soccer practice or volleyball practice, or my chairs with my lamp and my pillows in my room. Even though nobody notices them, I like to do it anyway. I thought this is what being intentional looked like. But I kept thinking, is that enough? Is that really all I want, is to be intentional? Is all I want is to match stuff? So I went into senior year with this vague idea, hoping that it would work out. At the beginning of senior year, we were told to be in the woods for 6 hours, alone, a solo. We were each given a journal with a personalized note in it, written by a teacher. Miss Dickinson wrote my note, she's our English teacher here, and she said that the first word that comes to mind when she thinks of me is joy. I realized that I do enjoy being joyful. It's something that I love. I love sharing it with people. It's something I want to share with people. I thought maybe I should switch my capstone idea to this. But I continued reading the note. She ended it with the verse Colossians 1:17. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. This verse explains why God does things for reasons. He uses every aspect of our lives intentionally to hold it together and bring good. As I continued reading Colossians, I saw how God did this in Paul's life, and how, even through his tough circumstances, he used Paul's life intentionally to further the kingdom of God and bring glory to him. I realized that this is what I was missing. I realized that this is what had brought Paul joy, sharing God's love for him and his story for the world. I realized that all I want is to be intentional, not just because I like to match things, but because God is intentional, and I want to be like him. I realized then that I could combine intentionality and joy together and finally link them together with something else that had been on my mind. I love architecture and interior design, and as my intended pursuit for college, I thought that by creating a space intentionally, this could bring joy and foster community. So I went into senior year with this big idea set up and focused on learning how this translates into the real world. At first I wanted to plunge right into the architecture and interior design side, but I realized that I should first understand how to foster community and how to cultivate joy. We as humans have this want and longing to be with people, to be together. Not all the time, no, but no one wants to be completely isolated. God made us to be a reflection of who He is, a reflection of His image. We strive to be like God, and God is in community, the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, creating the perfect Trinity, the perfect community that we should all want to be like. As I looked at where I have found the most community, I found that it is centered around the people and the time spent with them. Being intentional in relationships and being present long enough to stop and listen to them. I thought I struggled with this. With a world full of school, homework, sports, music, leadership positions, I get going so fast and so busy that I feel like there's no time to stop and listen and talk to people when it is needed. So I interviewed Mrs. Klima, asking her how she practices being present, as she is one of the most present people there is with everyone and anyone, as well as having a background in counseling, which consists of stopping and listening to people. She said one of the most important things is being aware of the blocks. Blocks meaning things that get in the way of you listening and stopping and listening to the details of people's lives. These are things like entertainment, productivity, observation, pride, fear, shame, anxiety. I found that these are the things that kept me from being present. But I also saw Jesus avoiding these blocks in his story of him at the temple when he got left there when he was 12. He's not rushing around trying to find his family, but rather sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. So I decided to try this out, and it's hard. I decided to eat lunch with some of the junior high students, and I found these blocks becoming evident. I sat in some girl's seat, there wasn't enough room for me, and I just felt like I was in the wrong place. I was so afraid that they thought I was in their way or I was not supposed to be there, even though that's not true. I was so afraid of that. And so it got in the way of me being able to be present with them. I also found that I may have been pushing it too hard. I found that being present comes with letting God use you, not focusing on those blocks and rather focusing on the people. So I ate lunch with 2 different junior high girls before I even thought about this. I did not go in with any expectations. I did not go in thinking I must be present with them. And it was one of the best lunches that I've ever had. They asked me genuine questions, and I got to learn who they were, and they got to learn who I was. Now I can see them in the hall and stop and wait. Now I can be intentional because God was first. Mrs. Klima says the reason why being present is so important is because it makes people feel valued and seen. And I hope that after that one lunch, those 2 girls feel valued and seen by me because I know I did by them. We find importance when we are present with people, and that is why community is so essential to our lives. Be intentional in relationships. Be present. Live in the moment within your busyness. It cannot be manufactured, but it can be preserved and fostered by ridding yourself and being aware of your blocks. And this will foster community, and this will bring joy. Joy seems like something we all know, something that we use all the time, but it's actually incredibly hard to define. I chose to interview Miss Dickinson as she was the one who pointed out my joy, as well as her being an incredibly joyful person. She said that C.S. Lewis defines it as a longing for what is good in his book Surprised by Joy. We talked through how to be joyful and why to be joyful, and realized that it's actually incredibly hard to give and receive, but it's crucial. Joy is inviting people out of their darkness to restore hope. Misty tells me about a time when she had a horrible day at school. She felt defeated, but without knowing, I walked past her window, smiled, and waved, like I do every day. It brought a new light to her. She felt valued and seen. Her joy was restored, and she felt hope that not all goodness was lost. And she continuously thanked God for that. Now, that's not a pat on the back for myself, but rather a representation of how being intentional in relationships and being kind towards others, even without knowing, can change their outlook on a situation. I love being joyful and long for goodness to be restored, but suffering is everywhere. We're faced with tough circumstances daily that tear us down. But Misty says that joy has nothing to do with our circumstances. Paul has joy within his suffering, not happiness, but joy, because he knows that God is using him intentionally, and he's aware of that. He knows that he will use him for the kingdom's good. Joy is a longing for what is good, a striving to be like God, and point towards who he is. Now that I understood a little bit more how to foster community and a little broader idea of what joy was, I decided that I could plunge into the architecture and interior design side and see how a space could highlight these concepts. So last spring, I had the opportunity of going to Ireland, and I got to see European cathedrals. It was there that I learned that each cathedral is created in cruciform, which is from a bird's eye view. Each cathedral is built in the shape of a cross. I realized then that architecture could be used to give more depth to meaning. This spring, I read a book called The Secret Language of Churches and Cathedrals, Decoding the Sacred Symbolism of Christianity's Holy Buildings. In architecture, the minute details get passed over constantly, but they actually illuminate the function and purpose of a building. Details facilitate a greater story than that which is on the surface. Richard Stemp, the author, goes into detail on each symbol, image, architectural design throughout history to reveal the greater story of Christ. theology of God, and key beliefs in the Christian faith. Everything has a reason for being in the church. For example, the stained glass windows. They're not only there to tell the story and narrative of God, but also they bring actual light in. They bring physical light and metaphorical light because they're the story of the Bible. The layout is also intentional. Most of the stained glass is on the east wall, and the pews face it, one so that you could read it, and also as a representation of us awaiting Christ's coming in the east. The sun also rises in the east, so every morning the sun shines through the stained glass perfectly. Cathedrals are intentionally built. They use every aspect of architecture to point towards God. There's no room for distraction. It functions as a place to commune as believers and glorify our one God, but also to educate and share the gospel, the greatest joy we can receive. This has always been the function of sacred spaces, though. This is why Jesus calls himself the temple, and why Paul and Peter call us the temple. It's where God and humanity meet in perfect communion with each other. It seems easy to have a kingdom-minded intent within a space so ornate and intentionally using the Bible, but a cathedral is just an example. My own church is not extremely ornate. However, any and every space can and will point to the image of God, because God dwells within us, his church. Maybe this is not portraying Christ through a stained glass window, but it could translate to being a place to share our stories, be in community, and where we can be present with others, and where God can still dwell. One thing I have learned about interior designers is that they get to do what they love by finding out what others love. Misty says a space is a facet of what God has given you. You put things in that you love and that bring you joy. You invite people into your space to invite them into your joy. For myself, this is why I have globes and my travel souvenirs all over my room, because I love to travel. It brings me joy, but also there's a story linked with each souvenir. Stories link us together. We find a strand of humanity within each one, a strand that every human possesses and relates us all together. The stories create unity and togetherness, community. As I look at my Honduras magnet that I got, it reminds me of the church and the children's joy, and it brings back those memories. It reminds me of the kingdom work that I should be doing constantly. When I invite people into my spaces, they get to see those things, and I get to tell them my stories. And hopefully they come out knowing me better and God's story as well. For Misty, this is why she intentionally has a dinosaur in view at all times in her classroom, because they bring her joy. She invites us into her room, and we walk out wanting to love dinosaurs. We invite people into our space to show them what we love. The details create a common interest, and friendship and relationships are made. The relationships ultimately spark friendship and someone who can value and see you and bring you joy even outside the space. So I began to wonder how interior designers make every single space make sure that it is affecting people positively. I got a glimpse into this as I was able to be involved in the Nehemiah project here at Front Range. It's a series of phases that get to renovate or add new facilities to our school. One of the spaces being renovated was the Commons. So I asked Dawn Farron, the lead designer of the space, if I could do anything to help. She said that it would help to know what the students wanted. I loved this because it felt like a way to intentionally create a space. A space is not just a formula, but it needs to be created in a way that creates community and gives the students they want to be, a place they want to be, So I led a focus group of about 10 students, and asking them simple questions like, where do you eat lunch? Where do you do your homework? What kind of seating do you like? What do you want from this space? All simple questions, but it was here that I realized how much more impact a space could have after being intentionally created to meet what the kids wanted. I learned that the Commons, which is used for eating and being together, was not actually being used in that way. They said it felt cold and dirty, and the tables were not comfortable. There was no centrality, no draw. But they also gave me ways that it could be potentially fixed, like new floor and new paint to make it feel warmer and cleaner, better seating like booths to make it feel more comfortable, a centralized seating area to have a focal point, or utilizing the kitchen space as a draw. I was blown away by their ideas, but also by their care for the school. It spurred from wanting a place that they wanted to be, a place where they can run into each other and talk and be in community. Not just a place to pass through, but it needs to be a place where people stop to be present. It also gave them a voice, as this information was passed on to Dawn Fair, and some of their ideas will genuinely be used. Their ideas could shape a space that like me, spend a majority of their time. Through their great ideas, they found a way to bring more joy to their lunches and study and community by merely making a space look and feel a little bit better. In addition to this, I was also able to interview an interior designer named Rachel Snyder. She took me to a home that she had designed and explained to me all of the minute details, as well as showing me pictures of previous projects that she had finished. She said the thing about interior design is that you have to design according to their wants and needs. You must learn about the space, the person the space is for, like we did for the Commons. The first thing she says is she takes inventory, because that gives her an idea of what the person values, their possessions, and what the space will be used for. The second thing she does is she makes sure that the flow of the room is correct. The flow is one of the most important things. Some people call it the feng shui, but basically it's just how a room works together and is pleasing. You walk into a space and you just know if something's wrong. You know if the flow isn't good. It's something innate within us. We know something's off because we're uncomfortable. There's so many things that go into interior design, all the little details, the paint, the color, the lighting. It all contributes to how a space feels and if it's comfortable or not. So the kitchen that we were in, that she was showing me, she said felt all wrong the minute she walked in. It was dark, the counter was in the wrong place, and you just couldn't really, something was wrong. She was uncomfortable. The flow wasn't there. This is it, but you can't really see it. So she added a new counter, she created a focal point with the oven and stove, and added more lighting. She said that the owner previously had hated cooking because the oven and stove were in the back corner. She felt cramped and she was sad and it was dark, and she just hated cooking for her family, and that made them upset as well as her. But now the room has more lighting and more room, and the stove is a focal point now. And her joy was restored because now she loves cooking and loves to be in her kitchen and be in community with her family. I have found that through Capstone, I was able to look at a space through a kingdom-minded lens. A space does not need to be perfect. It doesn't even need to be beautiful or completely functional. Sometimes it makes it better, but a space only shapes us if its purpose is pointed towards God. For a cathedral, this is why there's a steeple, to remind us that the building is always pointed towards God. For FRCS, this is continuing to foster a distinguishable community. For Honduras, this is the stories that they're able to share within their small, tight-knit homes. Roosevelt once said that comparison is the thief of joy. Do not compare your space to other, more better, beautiful spaces. Find out what your space's stories are. Find out how your space fosters community and how you can be present within your space. Name what is good. Name what corresponds with God within your space. Find out what you are thankful for within your space. Then intentionally shape the space around that. God is intentional. Be intentional. This then will shape you. This will bring you joy.